Obviously, you get a lot of bad press, and you know, I suppose in a way I'm sort of similar, really, in that I quite dislike just about everybody, but I think you probably dislike people even more than I do.
Why don't dislike people? Why would I be disliking people?
Why? Because I think you certainly give a feeling of not understanding what people are going through, and I feel very concerned that I've got, you know, I would like to think that I'm okay. My partner's working, and I do freelance, but I'm concerned that in my area, in my neighbourhood, there are people on benefits who are really, really suffering, and I think there are going to be more people who are dying of cold and ill, of being ill, and children going without food, mothers going without food to feed their children. I know of stories where, for example, a mother was breastfeeding her baby. She was unable to afford to feed herself, so her milk dried up, and now she's having to feed her baby formula.
Okay.
Now,
well, I can't understand why that would be the case.
Because of the situation of the cost of living, Mr. Duncan Smith.
Yes,
she can't afford the food.
Well, there's lots of things that we do to help people who have particular crisis programs. We have crisis funds, the social fund is there, we have loans, crisis loans as well. You know, local authorities are now discharging that duty. We've passed all the money down to local authorities. Makes an application to the local authority. It's their responsibility to ensure that she's fully supported and cared for. You know, these funds are there and available. That's the whole point about them. We provide a significant amount of money across the country for people who have difficulty, and that's what it's there for. Many people avail themselves of it, and that's exactly what it's for. And we've kept the funds running at the same level, and we've given them to local authorities because it's much more efficient for a local authority to deal directly with an individual that comes to them, because they're in the community and they can deal with their immediate needs rather than somebody at the end of a telephone, as it was before, simply making a decision about someone's needs when they never see them. This way we think it's much better, much more efficient. Local authorities can decide how they put that money out and what kind of care and attention they give them, which is important, I think.
But you're saying that's at the same level, but the cost of living has gone up how much in the last couple of years?
Yes, but these have been rising over the last few years. So
but not in line with inflation, not in line with the cost of food and
well, part
heating.
of the level we did at 1%, it was rising at the level of CPI inflation. So, you know, the reality is, I don't say these things are easy, I simply say, however, we as a country do provide funds for people who have difficulty. This is not about punishing or hurting people, it's about making sure that if they have crisis moments and difficulties, that there is support there for them. And that's exactly what there is through the funds that we've made available, and often much more than many other countries do as well.
But well, I'm not talking about other countries, are we? We're talking about the UK.
UK.
But I am concerned that I can see people's heating bills going up, and realistically people are choosing between heating and eating, and now even food banks have now got to use food that you don't use heat to feed, you don't use heat to heat up the food. But I really don't get that you understand really what people are going through.
I'm afraid I do. I see people in all sorts of circumstances, a great deal, all over the country. I travel all over to various locations and meet all sorts of groups, charities, all sorts of people working with people in difficulty. I spent time setting up an organisation to do that myself before I came into government. You know, I've spent most of my time trying to do this, and most of my reforms are aimed at getting people who need that support, but helping those who can help for themselves to move on, to get work, and to provide for themselves. That's the change and the nature of the change that I'm bringing. And the reality of our reforms has been that's all the direction of travel for them, and that's what I'm after. I'm after helping people to do the best for themselves, but at the same time those who have difficulty and can't do, well, they get support, and that, I hope, quite generous support.
You think it's generous support, do you?
I said for those who desperately need it and can't fend for themselves, that's exactly what we do. You know, we have disability payments, we have sickness benefit payments. These payments go to people who are in need, and they go on that basis, and that's exactly what we should do.
Well, it is, but we certainly should be paying them and supporting them. But a lot of them, you must have seen that people are not getting enough, and that they are becoming very, very ill. I mean, I'd be interested to see the figures.
Those who don't get enough, you know, the point I keep making to you is purpose of the local authorities and ourselves is to ensure that if this is brought to our attention, that those people get the support that's necessary, that their lives are helped and supported and reordered. If it's problems of debt they have, etc., that's where you need to help intervene with them to sort those problems out, not just leave them with the occasional crisis fund, but actually help try and turn those lives around, and that's critically what we want to do.
Well, absolutely, but someone on benefits that cannot have a spare room in a council house without paying for it, but then without paying for that extra spare room, what about all the people who've got disabilities, or they've got a disabled child and they need that room, or actually they'll go, yes, I don't need that extra room, I want to downsize, and that house isn't available? The
whole position about the spare room subsidy is this, that we have about 250,000 people at the moment living in overcrowded accommodation who are desperate to get into houses and flats that they can house them. We have 1 million people sitting on the waiting list for social housing, and at the same time we have a large number of people who are in houses where they don't use all of those rooms. And what we're trying to do is to get the balance in what is finite resources, to try and make sure that actually we try and meet what people's need is with what the availability of the resources. That's all. This is about saying to people, look, you know, we'll try and help you out. We gave about 180 million in the last year to councils separately to try and make sure that if some people, you know, who may need to move, it might take 2 years to move them, that they can hold that off for 2 more years or whatever. It may mean that some houses need to be completely adapted separately before they're moved. That money is available for them to do that. This is not a process of trying to push people, but it's a process of saying, look, councils and housing associations need to make sure that the accommodation they've got, as far as possible, meets the needs of those who need social housing. You know, but what I never hear from anybody is the concern that we inherited about the 250,000 people living in overcrowded accommodation. I get them in my surgery at times, you know, mums are having to live with 2 or 3 kids in the same room. You know, this is what I'm trying to deal with. At least try and give them some chance of getting into houses. While we have to build more houses, that's absolutely the case, and we're now doing it. The reality is, however, we still have to try and help those people who live in overcrowded accommodation. This is not about punishing people in houses where they don't occupy all the bedrooms. This is about trying to say, let's get the balance right. And we have made exceptions for children who can't share in the same room, and for people who have a carer that has to come and stay, for disabled people. These are all exemptions that we've made to these rules. So we try to introduce this in a way that I think is careful and considerate. As I say, the money we gave to local authorities is there so that, on the ground, they can make the day-to-day decisions that may mean they can smooth this out for a year or 2, or they can change a house and give it the adaptations that are necessary before they're going to move. All this is in train. That's the purpose of what we're trying to do. But you know, if you happen to be a housing benefit tenant and you rent from the private sector, you know, the last government made sure that you were not allowed any spare rooms. So we have an anomaly here between 2 groups of people on housing benefit, one group who can't have a spare room and another group that can. I'm simply trying to make sure this balances out in the reasonable amount of time, and to make sure most people get a fair deal out of their housing. And that's all we're after.
I'm sorry, we have to see our next appointment now.
Yeah, come in.
Oh right, okay. Then
It's only 15 minutes per appointment.
okay, right.
Well, no, if you've got another question, I'll answer that. And then I think
Well, I'd got quite a few, but I can book another one. I can book another appointment.
Nice.
That's not a problem.